press Matt how long school takes.
Maybe.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
I was like, what am I looking for?
There we go. All right. So a couple things. First of all, y'all are gonna have to bear with me. My voice is kind of giving out on me. Okay, there we go. And then, okay. Alrighty. So what do the Pilgrimage Music Festival and the conflict in the Middle East have in common? Anybody? Well, other than the fact that both could be considered active war zones, not a lot. I just needed an attention getter. That's not to say that they have nothing in common, however. Hozier was one of the headliners at the Pilgrimage Music Festival, and the conflict in the Middle East is a primarily colonial one, and Hozier has plenty to say on colonialism. As we watch the modern day effects of colonialism play out in the Middle East, one of the most helpful things to do is look back at how colonial struggles have played out in the past. I've been listening to Hozier for about 5 years now, and it's been fascinating to watch how his discography has evolved and intermingled with current events, especially as they relate to modern day colonialism. Hozier is Irish, and he takes a lot of inspiration from the plight of the Irish in terms of British colonization. And his music is anti-colonial at heart. I have 3 points that I'd like to get through. First is a very, very, very brief history of British colonialism in Ireland. Second is the loss of religion through examining Hozier's song from his self-titled album, Foreigner's God. And finally, the loss of language through examining his song, Butchered Tongue, which is off his 2023 Unreal on Earth album. According to the Trinity College of Dublin, the British first arrived in Ireland in around 1169. So we're going on about 1,000 years now. From the initial invasion, they struggled with the indigenous population and used a variety of super brutal tactics to try and subdue them and force them into uniformity. In the 1640s, one of the most tragic events was that about 20% of the Irish population died due to British control of food. Is anybody here familiar with the Irish potato famine? So the funny thing about that is that the British actually just have an incredible PR team. It wasn't a famine at all. The indigenous population was growing plenty of food. The British were just exporting it back to Britain. So it wasn't a famine in the sense that we think of, in that it was just natural causes. It was fully manufactured by the British. Going into modern day, according to the UK National Archive, after about a 2-year struggle, Ireland was split in June of 1921, into Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is its own sovereign nation, whereas the Northern Ireland is still controlled by the United Kingdom. However, the conflict didn't end in 1921. According to Britannica, there's a period of conflict from 1968 to 1998 called the Troubles. The Troubles was a conflict primarily defined by Irish nationalism, and that's where we get a lot of the modern day imagery when we think of Irish conflict. The car bombs, it's where U2 got a lot of its music. And my point in bringing this up is that it's still relevant. There are people under 40, millennials, that are still being impacted by colonialism in Ireland. So now that we have a super, super rudimentary understanding of how British colonialism worked in Ireland, I'd like to look at it through the lens of Hozier's discography. Starting off with his album that's about 10 years old now, he has a song on there called Foreigner's God. In his song, Foreigner's God, one of the verses he opens with, "She moves with shameless wonder, the perfect creature rarely seen, till some liar brought the thunder when the land was godless and free." The refrain of the song is screaming the name of a foreigner's God, the purest expression of grief. According to his track-by-track YouTube interview, the meaning of the song, he says, is difficult to verbalize, but it's about feeling like an alien from your own culture, which is a consequence of colonialism. Another popular interpretation of the song is that it's a loss of progressive pagan sexual values. According to Amanda Scott, there's a correspondence between a Celtic woman and the wife of a Roman emperor, and the Romans and the Celts are ancestors of the British and the Irish, so though it's not directly tied and it predates the conflict, it's still relevant. In this correspondence, the Celtic woman says, "We Celtic women obey the demands of nature in a more moral way than do the women of Rome. We consort openly with the best of men. You allow yourselves to be debauched in secret by the vilest." So as you can see here, it's a much more fluid and open understanding of sexual ethics than the sexual ethics imposed by the British through the faith of Christianity. So now that we've covered the brief loss of religion, I'd like to look at the loss of the Celtic language. In his 2023 album, Unreal on Earth, Hozier has a song called Butchered Tongue. One thing I'd like to point out is that from his first album released up into his latest, he's been talking about the impacts of colonialism in Ireland, which really speaks to his passion for the subject and how much it means to him. According to the Discovery Society archive, the British actively sought to stamp out the Irish language, given that they said that it was what the root of the Irish's backwards ways. We know today that the Irish's ways weren't backwards, they were just foreign to the British and thus deemed lesser. The archive states that today's Irish language movement seeks to reclaim and reestablish public relationship with Irish, and by placing it in the context of the history of colonialism, to restore the language to its place at the heart of Irish and Northern Irish society. Bringing it back to Hozier, in the song, the end of each chorus is "a butchered tongue still singing here above the ground." This is a reference to Hozier's efforts to understand and practice the Irish language, despite the violent efforts of the British to force the indigenous populations into conformity with Anglo-Saxon culture and language. Another line in the song says, "The ears were cut from their men if the pitch cap didn't kill them. They are buried without scalp in the shattered bedrock of our home." According to the Irish League News, this is a reference to the practice of pitch capping, which was used during the 1798 Irish Rebellion. The British soldiers would take suspected Irish rebels and pour boiling tar in their heads. If the shock of that didn't kill them, they would then rip the tar off, scalping them, and killing them at that point. I don't think that Hozier does this just for shock value. I think he does it to reference the cultural trauma suffered by the Irish people at the hands of the British. So what? All of this is pretty interesting in theory, but unless we can apply it to our everyday lives, I don't really think that it has a point. This information is useless unless we take the way that Hozier speaks about the plight of the Irish and apply it to spaces that haven't been decolonized today. Gaza and the West Bank, the American-dominated culture of Hawaii, and arguably the Russia-Ukraine conflict are all situations that have the possibility to devolve into a loss of culture similar to that of the Irish by the British. However, by taking accountability for the ways that we are complicit in colonialism and the ways that we benefit from it, we can potentially prevent the imposition of more butchered tongues and foreign gods.